When I returned to the PC enthusiast scene in early 2016, the 980 Ti was the fantasy graphics card for people whose dreams were a little more pragmatic. While the Titan X sat a short walk beyond the wildest dreams of avarice, the 980 Ti was just 3% slower for 30% less money, sacrificing half of the Titan's 12GB frame buffer at a time where 6GB was more than enough for most games. At the time, I still couldn't justify spending that much on a gaming upgrade, so a part of me still feels a certain veneration for this former high-end card, almost like getting to drive a car whose poster you had on the wall as a kid. As far as graphics cards go then, the GTX 980 Ti is my McLaren F1. While the specs on paper might not look quite as mind-blowing in 2022 as they did in 2015, the GTX 980 Ti still looks pretty enticing today. 6GB of GDDR5 is enough to run modern games above the lowest texture settings, and with estimated performance above that of a modern GTX 1660, it should still have enough grunt to achieve some decent frame rates. Of course, it's not like the graphics industry has stood still in the last 7 years, and to get this kind of performance in 2015 had a pretty high cost. Maxwell didn't have Pascal's legendary efficiency, so this card requires 2 PCIe power connectors and can pull in excess of 250 watts all by itself. For context, an RTX 3050 performs about 12% higher according to Tech PowerUp, and can do so with about half the juice. For even more context, the other cards I've compared the 980 Ti to so far cost between £200 and £400 brand new, whereas I picked up my 980 Ti for £160, and prices are continuing to fall. So if you're on a strict budget but have a decent 600 watt PSU or higher, this card could very much be worth considering. I'll be testing today on my usual test rig, both in its moderately priced gaming PC configuration, representing the average enthusiast gaming PC in 2022, as well as the more reasonably priced gaming PC setup that more closely matches the kind of top-end gaming rigs people owned back in 2015. Off to a flying start, God of War is a gorgeous AAA title that the 980 Ti can handle quite easily. At 1080 original settings, it pushes close to 70 FPS on average during regular gameplay, with 1% lows occasionally dropping below 60, but not enough to cause an issue. Cutscenes and boss fights are this game's weak point, sometimes dropping 10 or 20 frames below average, so although it's possible to reach almost 60 FPS on average at 1080 high, I'd urge you to be cautious as certain moments in gameplay are likely to stutter. On the other hand, the 6GB frame buffer gives you free rein to turn up texture quality to high or even ultra, though at these resolutions I'd argue that it doesn't make that much of a difference to overall image quality. Because of its dynamic resolution scaling, I'm used to the Final Fantasy VII Remake never looking all that good. I don't think many, if any, of the GPUs I've tested so far have even run close to full 1080, with the possible exception of the AMD Fury X. With the 980 Ti then, Final Fantasy not only plays very smoothly, but also looks pretty incredible. I'd probably suggest using a 60 FPS cap, as general gameplay at 1080 averages close to 90 FPS, but can drop into the 50s and 60s from time to time. If you have a 1440 monitor, the game still keeps up, averaging 70 FPS. Guardians of the Galaxy is a weak spot for Maxwell. As I've noted before, the current 512.15 driver set performs incredibly badly on these cards, and this has been the case all year so far. This is definitely a driver issue, as rolling back to 471.11 sees average FPS double. With the right drivers, the game can run through its built-in benchmark at 56 FPS on 1080 high and 54 FPS on ultra. In-game is another matter, as the opening level has quite an impact on frame rates. Certain areas can cause averages to drop into the 40s, but from what I can tell, this isn't representative of the game as a whole. Forza Horizon 5 is a great experience on the 980 Ti, with plenty of room to step things up in terms of quality settings. The built-in benchmark is a bit more demanding than the majority of gameplay, so although it records a 70 FPS average at 1080 high and 49 FPS at 1080 ultra, you'll see higher frame rates than this in everyday driving. The exceptions are during scenes with lots of cars on screen at once, like the start of races, and also tunnels can be curiously demanding too. This was particularly troubling in this week's seasonal event, which starts off in a race that's roughly 25% tunnel-based, and did see some occasional drops in FPS. I had a massive grin on my face while playing Halo Infinite on the 980 Ti. None of the desktop GPUs I've tested so far this year have been able to come even close to a 60 FPS experience in this title during open world gameplay, not even the closest competitor, the Fury X. Imagine my delight then when the 980 Ti was able to hit a respectable 63 FPS average in single player gameplay at 1080 low. I even managed to score a few kills in a big team battle, which is either testament to the benefits of a 70 FPS average and lows only as far as 51 FPS, or because I got myself a gun goose. The theme of this video was that the 980 Ti was like driving your childhood dream car, so for Cyberpunk I had to dust off the Caliburn. Medium settings are recommended to get the best balance of visual quality and performance in this title, and the 980 Ti delivers the goods. Driving gameplay averages just shy of 60 FPS. Adding FSR Ultra could push it over the line if you're not bothered by the added softness. If you can tolerate slower frame rates, stepping up to high settings averages over 40 FPS and doesn't drop below 30. Rainbow Six extraction has been a bit of a disappointment performance-wise so far, so I'm glad to have finally found a card that can punch past 100 FPS on average. The 980 Ti averages 101 FPS at 1080 high, regardless of whether using a quad-core basic setup or an overclocked 6-core, with lows only dropping to 76. It's still possible to increase settings as far as very high without dipping below 60, though I'm not sure there's a whole lot of merit to that choice. If you're looking to give your 240Hz monitor a workout, here's a great place to start. Splitgate performance varies a little depending on the map, but my average across several matches came to 270 FPS with lows of 176. The quad-core setup suffered a little, mainly at the low end, though this shouldn't be a surprise, and I dare say anyone languishing on an old Skylake i7 could simply drop quality from 1080 Epic to something more conservative to avoid any drops in frame rate. Depending on your preference, Vanguard can be pushed pretty hard on the 980 Ti. I only went as far as 1080 medium with high textures, and saw an average over 90 FPS with lows a hair below 60, or just above 50 on the quad-core config. Dropping to low doesn't gain a huge improvement, just passing 100 FPS, but not quite enough to take us into the realms of high refresh monitors. You might have just enough leeway to step quality up to high, but I didn't test it and I suspect it would see 1% lows drop below 60, and that's not really recommended here. Fortnite almost plays like it was made for this. If you want the high refresh experience, the 980 Ti can deliver over 200 FPS at pro settings on both the quad-core and 6-core setups. And while the game is rather known for stuttering at this point, 1% lows stayed above 100 on both configs. If you're more inclined towards aesthetics over frame rate, good news, you can pretty much have both. At high with epic view distance, the 980 Ti manages to just scrape below 100 FPS on average, though at this point the dreaded stutter starts to make itself known, and 1% lows are down in the 40s. I'm not inclined to play Battlefield 2042 at low settings. Firstly, if graphics really didn't matter, why would anyone play this game? Oh wait, they don't. Secondly, I find it wise to try and balance visibility with frame rate in these big open world shooters. 1080 medium manages to push just past the 60 FPS average and drops into the low 40s. Dropping to low, whether I like it or not, does offer a more solid frame rate. Which you pick is ultimately your choice. Warzone was great, which is weird. I'm used to having something critical to say about this game, usually about textures or performance on older hardware, but nope, this is pretty stellar performance. Textures loaded nicely, and at 1080 with settings mostly on normal to medium, I saw an average FPS of 84 and lows close to 70. I even got a surprising number of kills, but I shouldn't get too used to that. All that being said, if anyone from Activision happens to be watching, your game still sucks on older hardware. Please fix the textures if you can. They say you should never meet your heroes. A lot of the cars that adorned bedroom walls were unreliable, were absolute pigs to drive, and would get outpaced by a Vauxhall Corsa today. Well, I'm glad to say the 980 Ti didn't disappoint. Sure, it's not a flagship anymore. The number of modern games you can play at ultra settings has dropped, but if you still have one of these from 2015, you probably don't have to worry about upgrading just yet. With the exception of Guardians of the Galaxy, there are no real indications that this GPU has aged poorly, and even that minor issue can be fixed by rolling back to some older drivers. If you're in the market for one, you should definitely consider picking one up, provided the price is right. But in the UK right now, used prices are starting to drop across the board on older cards. Considering its age and power requirements, I'd recommend paying less than you would for a 1660 or 1660 Super, as either of those cards is probably a better buy in the long run. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.